Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi. Uh, we're finally here. Hello. Hi,
Took a little bit
Begune.
longer than we were expecting, but it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. It's alright. Yeah, it's not like I had much better things to do. Pumpkin. Basically, the issue was that vegans shouldn't focus on personal responsibility, right?
Yes. So I guess if I can start with an opening statement or something of that
Mm-hmm.
kind. I guess how I would put my perspective is that I think that when we look at something like veganism, we should understand it just as a political movement, and as any political movement, you don't create actual changes to material conditions by just individuals acting differently. That you run to a collective action problem where people's actions are determined mostly by their environment and the things that are around them, and so you aren't going to really get all of America to simply stop eating meat just by making moral arguments at them. I've thought about it, and I would say there are a few things that you would really want to do to accomplish that. Beyond doing things like making a vegan lifestyle easier, cheaper, more efficient, easier for people to do. That really comes down to the industries that prop them up expanding, which isn't really happening right now because it's not quite profitable enough, and a lot of that is just due to market forces sort of just are as they are, and it's really hard to break into market share if you don't have any yet. Uh, and I would also say that generally speaking, I feel like it would be a lot easier to get people to vote in a way that would bring about veganism rather than to simply just change their own lives enough to allow that market to start existing. For example, someone like me, I think the moral arguments for veganism are good, but it's not. It's so intrusive to my life to change my entire diet in order to live a vegan lifestyle that it's not something I can really do. It's not that I can't do it. It's just that I don't care enough, but I would easily vote for policies that would bring about veganism. And I think something you'll find if you really look into it is that that is true for a lot of people. And basically, we get into a situation where it'd be much easier to legislate into existence material conditions that accomplish veganism than it is by just getting people to change their own behavior. So I don't think individual responsibility is a good way to go about actually changing the conditions that animals live in. I think we should focus on broader, more systemic changes.
Yeah. Okay. So, cool. I already have a few things about that, but I'm gonna let Begune speak. And when they're done, or if they don't say something thinking about, I'll jump in as well. Go ahead, Begune.
Well, I guess we agree on some aspects. I think you're right in regards to policy making, and that if it was more accessible, more people would follow it, and I think that's largely what we're seeing. I guess if the premise is that we should be focusing more on policy change, then I would agree with you. But I guess the argument is that we shouldn't be pushing for individual responsibility. And I guess my where I would kind of give an example there is you could argue about women's suffrage, women's right to vote, for example. You can't really in many aspects you can't put that on individual responsibility, but there needs to be some sort of cultural consciousness that that's the way to move forward before you can start making policies. So I think it's feasible that a lot of people already understand the arguments for veganism, but the issue is that one, it's for the majority of people that understand that it's not remotely impossible for them to change their lifestyle. And if you agree with the moral argument, I don't see why you wouldn't. And in regards to policy, if you're in favor of voting for more plant-based diets. I wouldn't necessarily consider that you to be a vegan. I would say that you probably understand sort of where the I think you're probably a little bit more sympathetic to the climate argument and things like that. So from an animal rights perspective, it would be I would see the primary thing I'm getting at, I suppose, just to make it simple, is that it is an individual responsibility. Like, I don't think that you could simply make it illegal, because I think that if something was illegal, I still don't think it would be. I don't think morality is predicated on whether or not it's legal or not. So I don't see policy as something that should be a focus for the moral argument. If you understand what I mean.
I guess I sort of understand what you're trying to say. It's just I'm more of coming at this from a pragmatic perspective, and there is sort of a weird situation where we get into almost a pedantic thing where, like, even if we're trying to talk about, like, structural, like, how our economy works and how, the industry is structured such that it allows people to be vegan or eat meat or whatever, like, at some point, individuals have to do things. And so, from a pedantic point of view, like, exactly where you say something is or is not individual responsibility, like if it's caused by individual action versus caused by the environment that individuals find themselves in, that's sort of a hard thing to talk about. If I'm not sure if that makes sense to everybody, what I'm trying to say, but like at some level, like all laws that exist were written by individuals. You know what I mean? So there is a weird pedantic thing going on there, but what I'm trying to argue is just that we're going to get better results from changing people's environment more so than we are from simply like trying to get everybody to believe a different thing and change their own life for them. Like, for example, another thing, something that you brought up is the climate, right? Like, we aren't going to solve the climate crisis by everyone just choosing to drive an electric car instead. Not because people can't do that, but because people won't. Like, you just won't get that sort of collective action out of people. That just generally isn't observed without a larger systemic change, and that's due to things like it not really being feasible for a lot of people, and since that market doesn't exist, companies don't invest in it, and it's sort of a paradox in that sense.
Sure. Could I just step in for a little second?
Yes.
The difference between I don't want to just keep nitpicking at your analogies or anything like that, but I guess the difference between the electric car analogy, and like doing a plant-based lifestyle is a plant-based lifestyle is like a plant-based diet, I suppose, is substantially more available to people than an electric car, so so I guess like when you say that we would derive more benefit from changing people's climate, I would argue that we're already in that situation. Most people have the capacity to just make different choices. And you could make the argument that, some people in food deserts don't have particular choices over what they eat or what they wear. And I'm fine with that argument, although I would argue that you could technically follow a vegan philosophy and still consume animal products, assuming that you're in a situation where you would probably starve without that. So I think that in regards to the philosophy, where the vast majority of people are already in a situation where they can make the move to a completely plant-based lifestyle. I don't think that there's any barriers for the majority of people in a first world country to making that change, other than convenience, which I think is really poor, like a really poor excuse when you're considering, the treatment of the overwhelming. Yeah, well, just the treatment of the majority of animals. I think that arguing that like your convenience is the reason why you're stopping. I think that's just a poor argument.
Well, the thing is, from my perspective, it's not that the convenience is a good argument. It's that it is stopping people from changing their behavior. Like, just flat out, people, like, as much as someone who believes in a lot of vegan arguments, like you can say that I'm not living up to my moral standards or whatever. Like, that's fine. But the amount of effort it takes to change your lifestyle in a world where, like, as someone who works a full-time job and stuff, like, a lot of the time it's just easier to, for instance, like, go and get some fast food than actually, like, try and make your own food or something. And since all of those options are meat-based around here, I don't, like, if I make that choice, I can't uphold a vegan lifestyle in that instance. And what you'll find is that convenience is really important to a lot of people's lives. And like, if you want to say, like, I'm doing something morally wrong, like, I agree with you. But also, like, if we're trying to actually change people's behavior, we have to acknowledge the fact that people just aren't going to make their lives much harder because of a moral conviction they have. People just don't generally do that. And again, it's going to be much easier to get people to vote in such a way that allows for to vote for policies that will push for veganism than it is going to get people to change their own lifestyles. And the thing is I generally don't care much about the moral, like, impetus of people within a political movement as much as I care about the material conditions that those political movements achieve. So I care a lot more about actually stopping, like, the conditions of factory farming than I do living up to the moral and philosophical ideas of veganism. I would much rather, like, eat meat and then go to an animal rights protest that is trying to achieve veganism than spend a huge amount of effort in my own life trying to stand for these moral principles, but not actually doing what I believe will pragmatically achieve the political ends that I'm trying to achieve. So that's just sort of my approach to politics in general. I don't think living up to a perceived moral philosophy is as important as achieving political ends.
Okay, so I guess you gave the example of someone who's essentially, like, they work long hours at a job and they're not able to they don't really have much control over their lifestyle given the condition they're in. I would say that's an example of someone I was mentioning before where they probably don't have much power over their own lifestyle, and that includes things like health. I think that's a part of a broader issue, and I would much rather, and generally when I talk to people about this sort of issue, I'm talking to people who already go to the shops, they cook their own meals, they have enough time on their hands to make the choices, So I don't, and again, like, I think I already agree with you on the aspect that there are plenty of people who are in a situation where they're access to make those changes, but I don't think that that's representative of the types of people that most vegan activists are trying to talk to. They're talking to people who already have that time on their hands and they can make that choice. So in the broader sense, I would agree with you that, yeah, we need policy change. We need a shift on that. But again, if we agree with the premise that animals have moral value just like humans, to argue that someone shouldn't make a individual choice to change that when they physically can, and it's a simple choice, it's actually not that difficult to make. You just, when you walk into a store, instead of choosing the steak, you choose tofu or whatever. It's really not a complex issue when we're talking about someone who has that capacity.
Okay, well, it's just again, like, I'm not the issue that I'm having here is like, I guess I would just ask a question of what are you like trying to achieve like on a broad scale? Because I don't really like, sure, I guess for the people who can, it is more moral for people to be vegan as opposed to not be vegan. But even if we reduce, like, even if everybody who easily could be vegan right now goes about that lifestyle change, that won't create a large enough shift in the market such that the conditions of factory farming and the terrible things that are happening to animals will stop happening. Looking at, the fact that animals do have rights and that we shouldn't mistreat animals, basically just because we think they taste good or something like that. With that belief, I think that our ultimate goal should be to get rid of factory farming altogether and replace it with a better way of getting food and feeding people. And the fact is we aren't ever going to achieve that without going bigger. And so it's just, here's the thing is I'm not trying to dispute about the moral worth of like people choosing to be vegan when they have that option available to them. What I'm arguing is that we are, creating a political movement here fundamentally, and when we're trying to create when we are leading a political movement, what you need to do is focus on the actual material conditions that you're trying to bring about in society, and the ultimate goal has to be to, I think, to eliminate things like factory farming and the mistreatment of animals. So I don't see, I don't see why we are, shifting focus in my mind away from the systemic changes that need to happen.
Do you would you think that it would be better for the people who can to go vegan if they went vegan? So let's just say that we have this broader sense that we need to change policy, but would you not prefer that all the people that can go vegan went vegan rather than no one went vegan but still push for policy change?
I mean, yes, that would be better, but my only contention, I guess, if there is one, and it's not really that big, is that I feel like too much of the messaging is about like the choices you can make rather than the systems that we live under and how the systems that we live under bring about harm to animals. It's sort of the same thing I feel about environmentalism, where I feel like too much of the message about your own carbon footprint, as opposed to the fact that, like, with the way we build cities right now, we can't, like there are lots of people who, because of the way we build cities and the way we get our energy, simply can't not pollute enough in order to, bring about the CO2 level. I'm sorry, I'm losing my track of thought, but basically, like, it feels like we only have so much like political capital, is how I would think of it, to spend, and it feels more important to me to fight for the systemic changes rather than to muddy our messaging with a bunch of messaging about how individual people should be acting and all that, rather than the policies that we need pushed forward.
Well, yeah, I mean, 100%. Like, I do think that we need to be pushing for systemic stuff, and I genuinely think that that's what the argument usually is. Like, I mean, sure, we talk. Activists will talk to individual people, but that's usually with any debate or social movement is to discuss these topics with individual people, because if you can't, like I said before, if you can't change the culture, you won't ever change the policy. So, and again, you've already agreed that it would be better if the people that can go vegan went vegan whilst also pushing for a systemic change. And again, like, I do agree with you that some people forget that these sorts of like a completely vegan lifestyle isn't available to everyone. Like there are people who live in certain conditions where it's basically not a feasible strategy in the long term for them to completely cut out animal products from their diet, because it might literally be one of the biggest sources of calories in their diet. So I would agree with you that some people do ignore that. But I think that to suggest that we only need to be telling people that you should be making voting decisions rather than making personal decisions in your life, I think that's a mistake. And I don't want to mischaracterize you by saying that's only what you're saying, but that's what I'm hearing right now.
Well, it's just I guess the mindset that I'm in is that it's. Sorry, I'm just trying to collect my thoughts, so I can.
That's fine.
What it is my contention is more of a contention of rhetoric than it is anything. And so, like, the problem that you run into is when you talk about people's own personal decisions so much, is you run into people who bring up that, oh, I can't do that because this, I can't do that because this. And then, of course, you have to say, oh, well, that's okay in this situation. And what you get is you get a narrative that's very hard to control. And I guess also another thing is something that I've heard you talk about. I do think it's worth bringing up at some point that when we talk about people's diets, we're talking about a pretty substantial part of their life, and I think, you know, saying, oh, you know, it's a very simple decision or something. The way you had talked about it earlier felt very flippant, and I think that attitude is really bad when we approach this, because you don't realize how hard it is for people to make that change, even if they're fully capable of it. And I concede, like, preemptively that yes, it is the moral thing for them to do. It's a big ask for one person to change their own diet like that, and I feel like it's important that we do what we can to make it easier for them, because the easier you make it for them, the more people you'll actually get changing their lives.
I mean, I just want to add in that you do realize that, like, none of us here were, like, born vegan. Like, we all have made the change. So when I'm saying that it's a simple change, like of course that's coming from a position of privilege, because I live in a country where I'm able to make those changes, and I live in a state where I'm able to make those changes, and I live in a city where I'm able to make those changes, in a suburb where I'm able to, and I have sufficient financial resources to make those changes, and I have family support and friends who are willing to support me in that endeavor. So obviously I'm speaking from a position of privilege, and I don't deny that, but to argue that, so those are the factors I'd rather focus on, is like you mentioned, like you've been mentioning before, is changing the the food climate. But to suggest that the simple changing of the diet is difficult, I agree that there are social barriers to it, and that there might be certain. I don't think taste barriers are a particularly big issue anymore. I think most people can easily get over the taste barriers.
If I could speak really quickly, I just want to say I feel like pretty much all the barriers are like social, cultural, a little bit economic, but again, you've already accounted for that. I just want to say, like, I will say, I think most of it is just like, you can't go out to eat with people easily. It's a cultural thing where you're so like, you've grown up with these foods for your entire life. It's really, it's not like the biggest deal from like a health perspective or anything like that. The cultural and social thing is pretty hard for a lot of people to get over, is all.
Yeah, which is why we need these discussions with people, because the whole point is to change the cultural climate, to get people to understand why we need to be making these choices. And yes, there is, I'm studying nutrition and dietetics, so I'm very familiar with how food relates to social interactions. It's very important. People eat 3 times a day, and they usually will eat with family or friends. And it's if you look on social media, almost half people's posts are about food. Food is a very big part of our lives, but that's not to say that someone shouldn't make the change, and that's not to say that the change shouldn't be made. And I think that if people are convinced by the moral argument, they will make the change. And I think that, I've already said this before, but that's why we need these sorts of discussions, because once people see these sorts of points, it becomes less frightening to make the change. And it's one of the reasons why we need to build a community around it. So I guess to recap the discussion so far is that we already agree that there are aspects of policy that need to be changed for healthy eating in general to be more accessible to people. The social barrier is a thing that's changing. It's way more accepted these days. And you can make the change without even necessarily, like for example, there are social changes that people make to their diets that without even having to be vegan. If you speak to any bodybuilder, half the time they don't go out eating with friends. There are plenty of non-ethical changes that people make to their food choices that affect their social life. So I don't think that that's a unique problem for veganism, and I think it's something that's in reality a very small issue. I think a much larger issue would be people living in food deserts and things like that. So I think again, like I said, we agree that policy needs to be changed in many aspects, but I don't think that we need to stop having these individual discussions and saying that, hey, this is something that you're contributing to that's extremely immoral, and you have every tool available to you that you can make those changes. And if we're talking to someone who doesn't have that capacity to make that change, I'm willing to grant them that it might not be possible for you to make those changes at the moment, and I'm willing to fight for your right to be able to make more ethical choices.
Well, it's just, I guess what what I'm trying to express right now is we need to keep our eyes on the end goal. And see, the thing for me is that from the outside looking in, as I've gotten more interested in this over the past probably year or two, the perception of veganism amongst pretty much everybody is people who are trying to argue specifically and only for people to change their own lifestyle to be vegan. And that I feel like it's very important that we get the messaging out about the policy-based changes and the systemic changes that we need made in society. I think that part of the message needs to be more important than what individuals can do with their own choices. Because I think, as I've said earlier, I think that obviously, I think we would probably agree that systemic and environmental changes are ultimately what change people's behavior in society. And when you, for example, if you look at a political movement like the women's suffragette movement that you bring up, their main message that people knew about them was they wanted to give women the right to vote. It was a policy-based thing. But when you think about something like veganism, the perception from a lot of people is it's about people individually choosing to be vegan rather than a movement based around people trying to solve a lot of the issues with the way we go about food and the a lot of the systemic problems that we've already talked about. And I think that that's very harmful to the movement overall. It gives people a really bad mischaracterization of what the movement is, what needs to be done to fix these problems, and it also puts the impetus on it makes it really easy for people who are against veganism, either because of I think mostly ignorance, to perpetuate that ignorance a lot of the time, because a lot of the people who for example, let's say is someone who is not in a position to make that lifestyle choice, they'll have a very negative reaction to a false belief that veganism is all about individuals choosing to do that, and that will perpetuate a very negative idea of what veganism is about. And that makes it very hard, I feel, for veganism to accomplish its goals. And so and this is something I believe for environmentalism too. I think the messaging needs to primarily be about what we need to change in society to bring about the changes ultimately in people's lives that need to happen. Because if we focus on what individuals can do, it puts out the wrong message and gives people the wrong idea about what the movement should be ultimately.
Would you agree that pretty much everything you mentioned right there, like environmental changes and, for example, the women's right to vote and all that all came about because a collective group of individuals decided that was the right thing to do?
Again, this is something I alluded to earlier. Like, you can, and this is what I said. I feel like this is something of a pedantic argument at some level. Like, at what point we differentiate between individual actions and systemic change is kind of wonky, because literally all systems were at some point created by individuals, and all change to systems will be made by individuals. But for instance, if you wanted to reduce the number of car accidents or something, you can't just go and say, hey, people, drive safer. Like, that's not going to work. You'd either need to put a lot of money into a propaganda campaign to cause a massive cultural shift, or you need to actually change policies that affect the rules that govern society. You can't think that you can't just say people should behave better and expect people's behavior to change. You need to put in a lot of work, either to cause, like, and when I say a cultural shift, I mean a massive cultural shift, the kind that like really reinvents the way people view the world, or you need to change the physical conditions that people live under. And while anytime that happens, it will be because at some level the actions of individuals. That doesn't mean that like we're going to this doesn't mean like you'll get there by converting one driver after another to drive in a safer way. You'll kind of need one of those two things to happen.
Okay, well, I mean, with veganism, like, and making a personal change, the reason why we have such a like, I mean, it's not just with veganism. It's like pretty much with every social justice movement. For example, like domestic violence, telling people to not just stand idly by if you suspect that someone is, being domestically abused. That's probably a really bad example. But I guess where social responsibility comes in regards to veganism is because people, when you buy an animal product, you are supporting an industry that, for example, a steak required an animal to die. So if you didn't choose that steak and you chose a plant-based option, there wouldn't have been an animal that required to die. I mean, not directly in that sense. So in regards to your car analogy, I would argue that the equivalent argument would be, to reduce the amount of people dying in car crashes, we should be telling people not to drive. And and basically you can't just expect everyone not to drive. You would need some sort of system in place to accommodate for that lack of transport. So, for example, making public transport more affordable. The difference between the symmetry breaker between veganism and public transport is that in veganism's case, public transport's already available. Plant-based options are already available compared to the car analogy where, people can't just stop driving because how the hell do they get to work if there's no public transport, So people can already make that change. It's just people, you could argue that people don't want to, and that's because of, maybe cognitive dissonance, or they're completely ignorant to the argument. So
Wait, can I say something real quick? I don't think that veganism's ultimate goal is to get people to choose to not eat meat. I think veganism's ultimate goal is to like outlaw the slaughtering of animals and stuff like that. Like these abuses of animals, I think, are like fall under animal cruelty and should be illegal. So it feels really weird to focus to me. It feels weird to me to focus so much on people making these decisions when what we ultimately need is a change to our laws, a change to the way we distribute food. A lot of that thing. I feel like the like, for example, I like, this is just a personal anecdote. I work at Walmart. I clean the meat wall pretty much every day, where like there's just like a huge wall that lines the entire store of meat, right? That comes from animals that are like killed and processed and all that stuff. That shouldn't be there. Like, fundamentally, it's not about people choosing to not buy that stuff. That should, like, the conditions that allow for that much meat to be produced shouldn't exist in society, and I think it should ultimately be illegal. So, you know, I and when you talk about individual choices and people's individual choice to go vegan, I do think that a massive cultural shift is needed, and I believe to some extent that people's individual choices to go vegan to, you know, like, increase the market share of these businesses that are providing these separate options, to invest more in the technologies that allow for, you know, better and easier food, and you know, a lot of stuff like that. That's important in accomplishing that cultural shift, I think. But I don't think that the ultimate goal is about people's choices. The ultimate goal is about what we tolerate in society. You know, we don't tolerate murder in society because we recognize that murder is a crime. We should recognize that butchering a cow because we want to eat it should be a crime, like, fundamentally.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we largely already agree on most things. I think that maybe it's just a little bit, we just have a little bit of a different opinion on these topics. So I guess my position is that that you could right now, for example, dramatically reduce the amount of animal suffering in the world if everyone that can reduce that, cut out animal products from the diet, made that decision. Now, policy change could be years down the track. You know, like, you know, even if we want it to happen, you know, there's, you know, you talk about the economics, you talk about, you know, all these things. I don't think that people who already fundamentally agree with the arguments should actively participate in, you know, committing the things that they're moral. They think that, you know, policy change is more important. I think that individual responsibility is there, and people should be making those individual choices, which I think is the vast majority of people. And I also agree that policy change is needed. You know, like, for example, it's illegal for someone to beat a dog, but there are people that still beat dogs. That doesn't mean, just because it's illegal doesn't mean that there isn't individual responsibility there. You know, we should still be making the argument that beating a dog is wrong, even though we have laws in place to stop that.
Well, here's where I would disagree with that being a dog example. If we were to outlaw the thing, like these sort of factory farms, like, the economically, like, there would not be this. I don't believe that there'd be this, like, giant underground black market for meat going. Like, I think largely our industries would shift towards a more plant-based diet pretty substantially. Obviously, just going cold turkey off of that would cause a lot of problems, like, with the supply chain, and, like, you'd have to be more smart implementing that policy. It would probably take, like, a period of, like, 6 months or something before you could, like, whatever. Like, I don't know. I'm just thinking about it policy-based.
But who's going to vote for that if no one agrees with it?
Well, yeah, I mean,
like, we
we
need the individual responsibility for people to actually make that case. And until we have those policies, people need to be making the individual changes where they can.
Well, no. Here's the thing: is, like, it. I don't think. Okay. I feel like fundamentally
Take your time.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I stutter. I feel like our disagreement is not about, you know, fundamentally even it's not fundamentally about morals or philosophy. Like, fundamentally, I think we disagree on, like, tactics about how we should go about accomplishing largely the same set of ideas. It's just I think we need to cause a cultural shift in the way we think about things, and I think we need to get people to recognize that this the factory farming system that we have right now is largely unethical, and I think the way you get people to recognize that is not by making them feel bad or think that or like appealing to their sense that like, oh, you're guilty for doing this. What you do is you have to show them that there is a brighter future ahead. Like you show people that yes, we can have a good diet based off of plants. Yes, we can accomplish all these things. And so I think the message of here's the policies that we change, here's the here's the changes we need to go about making in society. I think that is a better message to get to cause that cultural change rather than what a lot of people who, again, this is what I said earlier, people view vegans as like, they view them very negatively from people who don't know a lot about them because they focus on, I think, the wrong parts of veganism, the sort of like PETA-esque like shock value things that have tainted the reputation of animal rights in the public eye for a long time, rather than the really sensible moral arguments, the really sensible policy positions, the really the reality that we can accomplish these things. I feel like a lot of people don't know what the alternative to a meat-based diet is.
Sure, but your whole point there, though, was about activism. It wasn't about individual responsibility. If we sufficiently met your requirements for how we should be, doing activism to people, what would?
If I can clarify real quickly,
Sure.
I think that vegan activism should focus on what we can do to change, what policy positions we can adopt to make the world better, rather than vegan activism focusing on individuals' responsibility to not harm animals. That is the specific point I'm trying to make, if you understand.
So I guess kind of to clarify your argument, just in my own words, you think that individual responsibility is important, but but it's more important for us to focus on policy change because that would allow for a greater number of people to make that shift.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think veganism will have done what it's set out to do until we adopt these policy changes, because I don't think, for example, something we've talked about a lot, like the people in food deserts won't ever really be able to shift away from that until, some pretty massive shifts happen either in policy and industry and in a lot of, things that exist currently in the world. And until we, get rid of factory farming and a lot of the animal rights abuses that exist, we won't have accomplished our goals. So to me, it seems really strange just to focus on reducing the amount of harm that is being caused in like right now in the present, rather than what ultimately needs to happen. Because again, I'll say this, I feel like a lot of people, the perception of vegans that they have no idea what the future, what a vegan world would even look like, and why that would be better than the world we currently live in.
Okay, I think I know what you're saying. I guess the part I'm confused in, though, is that, and you would already agree on this, that like we need, like you already agreed that the talk should happen and we should be doing activism. From at least from the content that I watched, that is the argument that a lot of people are making, is that we should. Here's are the choices that we can make right now. Here is how you can get involved in activism, and here's how you can convince other people to do the same thing. And for example, organizations like PETA already make active political moves to change policy and to get for example, like cage eggs banned and things like that. Like there are already policy changes in the works. I just struggle to see how if people agree with the argument, I struggle to see how you wouldn't already you wouldn't want to make that personal choice. If you agree with the arguments, I don't see why you wouldn't make that shift to change your lifestyle with and just argue that, oh well, I want the policy to be changed. Why not make that individual change to your lifestyle and push for the policy, which is largely what I'm arguing for. Like, I agree with you that policy needs to be changed, but I also make the individual choices to my life because I think that's important, because I don't want my money to be going to those industries when I can choose other options. You know what I mean?
Well, here's the thing. I guess the way I look at it is it's sort of like, so this is unrelated, but this is just another political belief. This is another political belief I have. Sorry, I'm a socialist. I don't like capitalism as it exists right now. I think workers should own the businesses they work at rather than like a CEO and a stock market existing. To me, what you're proposing sounds like saying, "Oh, why don't you like go and donate to charity and like do all this stuff with your own money rather than focus on the economy as it is?" And the answer is because the structure, the policies that exist are fundamentally what need to change in order to make the world a better place. So I feel like it's not even that, and another thing in that example, like giving your money away to charity is a good thing, and you should do that. Like, right? Like these are good things to do, and I believe in doing them. It's just that as a political movement, we don't want to focus on these to the detriment of our actual policy proposals. And I feel like, especially with veganism, the messaging is bad, and we need. Again, what I'm saying is that the activism that we do needs to focus on putting out the message of our policy proposals more, rather than the message of what one individual person can do to make the world slightly less bad.
Yeah, the issue I have with the no ethical consumption under capitalism, like, I agree with that premise, because, for example, I own a phone, and that was likely made by some child worker in China, right? Like, there are parts of that involved, and for example, I buy secondhand phones to avoid that direct contribution to that sort of thing. The thing with animal products, and again, I feel like I'm feeding a fed horse at this point, to use a vegan to use a vegan metaphor. You're directly contributing to something that you do not need to contribute to, right? Like with a phone, for example. I already gave an example of how you can avoid contributing directly by buying secondhand things, right? And I think that's probably something that most people should be doing. But when people can make, for example, when people can make a lifestyle change, and I agree that there's a broader system that needs to be brought down. But if you can make that change, then why not? Because every time you're putting money into buying a steak, when you could buy something like tofu, like it's extremely trivial to not do that. Like, you're not giving away anything by choosing one privilege.
If I can just interject, that decision is the more moral decision. What I'm saying is that vegan activism should not focus on telling people to make that decision as much as the message should be about our policies. And I say this because I think that the message that most people have about veganism is it is about lifestyle choices, and a lot of people don't know about the policy changes that should be made and can be made, and what that should ultimately look like. Again, this is where the thing that I'm arguing is that I think it's the focus of activism and the rhetoric that's used that's wrong, not so much the actual moral argument here. Like, obviously, yes, it is good if people, it is good if people buy tofu instead of a steak, in the same way that it's good if a socialist donates to charity rather than accumulate their wealth and spend it on trivial commodities that they like. But fundamentally, that is not the ultimate goal of the political movement, is not to get individual people to make more moral decisions. It's to change fundamentally the material conditions that we live under.
Yeah, that's that's the thing, though, is it's like we already have that change in that system. You can already make that change to your lifestyle. Like, I think that you can point to other examples where, like, I don't know, I can't think of an example right now, but it's like you can point to plenty of examples where people physically can't change their direct contribution to unethical things because ultimately they're living in a capitalist society and there's unethical practices going on there. But that also like ignores the fact that, for example, it's equating that it's basically making the assumption that all things are morally equal, right? Like I think that there are things that are more morally imperative. For example, like not contributing to child slavery is a big moral imperative. I think that there are limitations to where you can contribute to that, but I think obviously there are more, like, you know, for example, like I would say it's pretty difficult to live without some sort of smartphone in modern day society. You can certainly do it, but you know, good luck trying to find a new phone that wasn't, you know, made by a child slave. But in regards to food, there is a plethora of options you can make that doesn't, you know, deliberately contribute to an unethical, you know, thing.
So I guess the contention here is you believe that we currently live under the material conditions that are, you know, where we need to be in order for veganism to, like, the ultimate goal of veganism to come about. And I guess I just fundamentally disagree. I think that there are too many barriers in the way that such that like people en masse. If we look at the population of Americans as a whole will not adopt veganism. That's just not going to happen unless we do what I said earlier, which is undergo a massive cultural change, which we need to do by sort of, you know, talking about these things more, right? Or by changing policy. And I think we need to we need to make these foods cheaper, more available. We need to educate people more. Like a lot of things need to happen, and that needs to happen more than we need individual people to choose to go vegan. Is the argument I'm making? I don't think we live currently under the material conditions that, like, I don't think it's like a switch that needs to be flipped such that we like go from a meat-eating America to a plant-based America. Like there are changes in the industries that exist in the world, in the laws that exist in America, in the culture of America, and a lot of other things, in the food that people have available to them. Even I would say, as in a privileged lifestyle that exists right now, like with the current businesses around here, with the current like things that are available to my town will not go from a meat-eating town to a vegan town. Like that's just not going to happen until we shift the way the food that is being made in the industry. And like it's sort of like a good example of this, I think, would be like the obesity epidemic. Like sure, personal responsibility can stop obesity from happening and help people get better and all that stuff. Like right, like that does happen. You can do that, but the obesity epidemic is not caused by a moral failing of obese people to not have enough individual responsibility to keep themselves healthy. It's caused by the change in what foods are available to people that lead people to eating more unhealthy foods that lead to obesity. And I think very similarly, we aren't going to see a change in people's diets until we change the foods that are available to people, the culture that people, a lot of other stuff like that. And like, do you see the point that I'm trying to get at here? Like, this is a collective action problem. Like, we're not going to accomplish what we want to.
I think we've gone in circles. Like, because I've already agreed with you that the food environment needs to change. But my point is that there are people that, you know, to use your obesity analogy, there are people who aren't obese. You know, they live in a condition where they have the time available, they have access to the food to not be obese. And I mean, obesity is a separate discussion, and that's a debate in the nutrition space as well. I'm not going to go there, but you know,
it's not a one-to-one analogy for one thing, but like continue.
Yeah. I get it. Here's the thing, though, is it's like, to me, and maybe this is a complete straw man of your position, but if a little girl is drowning in a puddle from a pothole on the road, I would help that little girl. I wouldn't just sit back and argue, oh, well, this is because we're not paying enough taxes to fix the road and that the government should be fixing the road. I think that those are both things that need to be addressed. I think that we should be helping the little girl that's drowning and also fixing the roads. I agree with you that there is a certain point where individual responsibility should not be argued against, but the reality is that we're talking about the majority of people can make those changes to their diet. That will have a massive benefit to animal suffering, the environment, and the food climate in general, because you're supporting those sort of market practices that would bring about that change, right? So I think in this case, the individual argument, the individual responsibility argument, just has a lot of power. I don't, I just struggle to see how you can argue that we can only be arguing for policy change. I just think that this is such a big issue that you need individual change, because and people should be expected to make individual change if they can, and the vast majority of people can.
Yeah, I think I would say I feel like we've gotten close to the end of this discussion, at least. I mean, I feel like there may be a little bit of a level of misunderstanding, or just a difference in viewpoints here. Because to go back to your analogy, like I don't feel like my position is that we shouldn't save the little girl that's drowning. It's more that when we're going about our activism, we should focus less on telling people to, like, you need to be the person who saves the little girl from drowning, and more focusing on like the taxes and how that's creating the problem. That's what I've been trying to argue. But I mean,
yes. I'm saying that.
Okay, I remembered what I wanted to say. If I can finish real quick. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's fine.
It's another thing that I've realized throughout the discussion is that I do think it'd be very helpful to look for me and for this discussion in general to look at the to what degree what foods are available to people, like as a more like evidence-based thing. Because would you say most people can make the decision to go vegan right now? That's true for, like, I believe that's true for like for individuals. Most people can, but for like the population, the material conditions do not exist to allow that many people to live a vegan lifestyle right now. Like enough of that food just isn't being produced, and also that realistically, like, that's not. I just don't see how that's a solution to the problems we're undergoing, and that's when I'm looking at this purely from a political perspective more so than a moral perspective. I care about achieving our political goals more than anything, and so what I'm saying here is more about what we need to be focusing on from in our activism more so than in our personal lives. Like in our personal lives, yes, we should be vegan, but that doesn't mean that our political activism needs to focus on telling individual people that they should be vegan. But I am interested in, like, looking up how available a lot of this stuff is to people, because I only know from personal experience, and I haven't actually looked at how much of all this stuff is being produced and where it's available. So,
I mean, if you want to have a discussion that some other time, I'm more than willing to have that discussion. But I guess my final question to you, because I think Calgary wants to say something, is: do you think that people should save the little girl from drowning?
And again, this is something I actually already addressed in my last statement. Like I said, like, yes, I do believe people should do that. I don't believe that should be the goal of the political movement should be to tell people to save the little girl from drowning. I believe that the political movement should focus on the conditions that lead to that suffering, and what people do, like, that's a moral statement that people should do that. But I don't think that the political like the activists in that analogy. If we want to go really far with this, I don't think the activists should be going around telling people that, oh yeah, it's a big political issue that we need to tell people to save little girls from drowning. Like, obviously.
So you don't think that I should? So I guess if I'm already addressing that we need to be filling potholes so puddles don't occur on the road and little kids drown in puddles. Even if I'm making the argument, so do you think that argument is more important than telling people that, hey, if you come across a child that's drowning in a puddle or a pool, for example, that might be even a better analogy for putting fences around pools. But I think you would agree, surely, that people, if people come across, for example, someone a kid in a pool drowning, and I think that's a fair analogy in regards to veganism. You think that people should save the kid, right? I think that we can make both arguments that we need to be putting fences around pools or filling up potholes on roads and also saving children from drowning. I think that there is an individual responsibility there that is required.
Okay, so I think the major difference here is I think there's a difference in between what we politically advocate for and what we do as individuals, and what is a moral action to do. I think there's a separation there. Like I don't think that we should need to incorporate all of the, I guess, like, moral statements about what we should individually do into our political messaging. Is the only difference there. But, like, yes, like, you should not do bad things and you should do good things. Like, I think that's sort of a very obvious statement. The argument that I'm trying to make is that it's more important for accomplishing our goals to focus on policy things rather than the individual responsibility that people have. Like, it's more of talking about the collective action problem than the moral statement itself.
All right. Well, I guess I'll just let Cow Guardian give her points. But thanks for the discussion. That was great.
Yeah,
Right.
it's definitely interesting, at least.
I'm more than happy to have another talk about this later. We can arrange something else. But I'd probably really like to focus. I'd probably more like to focus on the availability of the diets next time if you want to have that discussion.
Yeah, that's actually not something I've researched at all. So, like looking into some of the actual data on that and like what that looks like is I think that'd be informative. I'd like to know about that at least. So
definitely, and I will. I'm more than happy to arrange a discussion about that. I'll get in contact with you later.
All right, I'll see you later.
Right. Thank you, Vigun. Very cool.
No problem.
Hi. Can you hear me well, Pumpkin?
I can.
Okay, cool. So I took some notes of what you were talking about earlier. And I guess the main thing is, do you know the definition of veganism?
I guess I don't know a dictionary definition of it. My understanding of it comes purely from interacting with people and observing what they talk about. So,
what would you say it is from your point of view, at least?
Veganism is like the lifestyle is a lifestyle of basically not acting in ways that like exploit animals for your own comfort, basically. And as far as a moral philosophy, I don't really have a set in stone definition for it, but it's basically, I would describe it as a political and moral system that argues that animals have rights, and that we need to respect animals' rights in general. And there's a lot of more complicated stuff and more detailed stuff that comes from that. But that's the basic stance that it takes.
Okay, so you agree with the political moral stance, right?
I mean, I could get into it a bit more. I don't think that the rights of animals are exactly equal to the rights of humans, but they do have rights. And I think, especially when you look at the things that exist right now, it's not even like a question between human rights or animal rights. It's just animal rights or mistreating animals. So it's not a very complicated moral question.
Okay. The definition is veganism is a philosophy and way of living which seeks to exclude as far as possible and practicable all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose, and by extension promotes the development and use of animal-free alternatives for the benefit of animals, humans, and the environment. In dietary terms, it denotes the practice of dispensing with all products derived wholly or partly from animals. So basically what that means is that not only do we avoid animal products to, avoid harming animals, but we also promote plant-based alternatives. For example, how do you think we're gonna find an animal-free alternative to animal testing if we don't invest in animal-free research?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that all feels in line with my understanding of veganism. You know, what I was trying to say wasn't eloquent in, what I was trying to express.
If we individually ignore the suffering that is caused to animals by animal testing, and nobody funds animal-free research because of it, because we say, oh, some law has to happen, we're not going to have animal-free research if we were to make it illegal, right? Like the animal research.
Yeah, this is something that I've thought about a little bit. Like, it's something I like. Well, okay, sorry. Let me just think about this a little more. Something that I've remembered is a bit of a frustration with people who, make fun of vegan food and say it tastes bad and stuff, because, like, a lot of the food that we make that's based off of animals tasted bad until we spent hundreds of years making it taste good with science and artistry and a lot of other stuff, right? So, one of the things that I've thought about more over time is the fact that a lot of this stuff is like work that needs to be done, and in a cultivation of technology, even. From that perspective, it's I've sort of realized the moral, or not even the moral, but the practical use in people like living a vegan lifestyle right now, because the development of that technology is important in allowing us to, transition away from exploiting animals, right? If what I said makes sense at all.
Okay, so from what I understood, you said you are, you understand the importance of living plant-based and basically funding, the plant-based market, I guess.
Yeah, I think developing that technology is important in allowing, like, for instance, like, I don't know how feasible this is, but like people have been funding like plant-based meat alternatives for a long time and getting much and much better at doing that. And theoretically, of course, this is theoretical, and I don't know how feasible like this is from a production standpoint, but we could in the future replace meat as it exists with plant-based meat, theoretically. Yeah. And that would be a really easy way to allow us to transition away from eating animals, right? But
but why fund plant-based meat if nobody's buying it, because it's not illegal to buy real meat?
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite catch the end of what you said there. Can you repeat yourself?
Sorry. I just said, why would someone invest in plant-based meat and technology of plant-based meat if nobody's going to buy the plant-based meat because they're comfortable knowing that it's legal for them to buy animal meat?
You said because I don't understand what you're trying to.
Am I cutting out, or is it the way I'm phrasing it?
I think it's the way you're phrasing it.
Okay.
I think. Okay, so let me just repeat back to you what I think your point is, and you can correct me on it. I think your point is, how are we going to develop these technologies if people aren't investing in them right now, both from on a consumer level and on a business level, right?
Yeah, but also
Okay.
like why would they invest in it if they don't see a future for it?
Well, the obvious answer is they wouldn't if there's no market for it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, I will say, like the Impossible Burger. I remember looking at this, and like they were extremely successful. So there is definitely at least a market for it right now. I'm
Yeah, because
interested.
vegans exist.
Yeah. So
So what if they didn't?
yeah. Well, there's an obvious inevitable conclusion from that, which is that science doesn't get developed. So, I mean, the more I've thought about this practically, this is something that I've thought about more recently. I would say, like, this is not something I've believed for a lot of my life, but it there is an importance in people developing a vegan lifestyle, quote unquote, or whatever, right now, because knowing how that works and what can what industry can allow for that to happen, and like how that would practically work in real life is important in accomplishing larger goals, obviously.
Okay. Sorry, go on.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess I'm just agreeing with the fact that people living a vegan lifestyle right now is important, because without it, we wouldn't know how to do so in the future, right? We have to,
Yeah.
we have to invest in this, like, from a scientific and even artistic perspective. Obviously, there's a lot of art that goes into creating all the products we consume.
Hmm. Yeah, so what is your justification for not doing that? If everyone was to think like you, like we wouldn't get anywhere.
I mean, to be perfectly honest, the answer is I've been thinking about it a lot and trying to come to a better conclusion about it recently.
Mhm.
So the answer is I don't know, because I haven't. This is something I've only become more interested in over time as I've become more interested in politics generally. So I haven't
Mhm.
had a lot of time to think about everything all the way through.
Yeah, that's all right. That's why we're having these conversations, exchanging our perspectives. And I do think that it's important for you to be convinced of something yourself instead of just, following it because other people are doing it or whatever, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh my God, please don't. Shh. My dog is
Yeah.
barking, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
so...
sorry,
Mhm.
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, one thing that, I guess one thing that's weird about my perspective on this is that I'm not super emotionally attached to this issue. Like, I don't feel super bad about the suffering of animals on an emotional level, but like the argument in favor of, like, it's just there's no logical basis on which you can oppose the like even if I don't care about I'm not as empathetic toward animals as other people. It's inarguable that treating them poorly is a bad thing to do, and from that, like, if we look at the material conditions that exist, like, if we can survive without hurting something, it's more moral to do that as opposed to doing that and as opposed to surviving and hurting something. So my interest in veganism comes more from, like, the fact that logically there's no way to argue against it, more so than I care a lot about the suffering of animals. So I know that sounds cruel, and I tried it, and but that's just I guess my perspective on it is
Yeah.
it's obviously a good thing to do, and there's no way for me to justify not trying to adopt this set of positions.
Mm-hmm. Here's the thing, though, right? I know a lot of vegans who actually don't care about animals. You know, they're not animal people or anything. But I don't care about you. I don't care about most people that I don't know well. That doesn't mean I'll get out of my way to harm you when I don't need to.
Yeah.
So how do you justify paying for animals to be killed unnecessarily?
I mean, the answer is I don't think it's a moral thing for me to do. It's just
Okay,
the,
but from the animal's perspective, whether or not it's a moral thing, or if you know, oh, you're just too lazy, it doesn't matter, right? They're gonna die for no good reason.
yeah,
How
no,
do you
I mean
justify
it's
that to
just
them?
it's not like again, there's not an argument to be made here in favor of doing this. It's just
Hmm.
the effort it would take for me to
Okay.
go from eating meat to being vegan. I haven't personally expended yet, and I
Hmm.
don't. And I find that it would be, you know, for me it's just like there I have a lot of problems in my life,
Hmm.
like mental health, like, and I only have so much effort to spend on trying to make lifestyle changes, and for me it feels more important to do things that benefit me than uh it is to do something that I believe is more moral. And you
Okay.
know, I want to get to a position where, you know, maybe in the future I'll be able to make lifestyle changes that I think are better for, you know, the animals that exist out there. But it's not something that I
Hmm.
feel able to do. Not like physically, but like I guess like emotionally almost.
I
Like
guess you don't feel urged to do it, right? It doesn't seem like an urgent thing to do. It doesn't seem like it would make much of a difference.
yeah, there's also that. There is, I guess, what I would describe as like a doomer perspective on it of
Yeah, yeah.
why is it important for me to not kill
Hmm.
these like 5 to 6 cows in the future, as opposed to when there are so many other animals that are being butchered anyway. It feels
Okay.
irrelevant
Hmm.
in the face
Hmm.
of something like that. Is all.
Here's the thing, though. I think I felt like this before I went vegan myself. I used to justify, like, oh, you know, because I was a vegetarian. And when I started realizing that there might be a problem with the dairy and egg industries, I didn't know much about it, but I started, you know, like contemplating on it. And I was like, you know, even if it's bad, I'm just a vegetarian, so it's mostly on the meat eaters that this happens, right? So it's not on me. It's basically on them. So why should I change when they don't? Um, but here's the thing, right? One of the things I realized, I guess the most important factor that made me, you know, stick to veganism is that this is not, you know, this is a market. Supply and demand exists, and a person on average kills about 200 animals a year for meat. So why would you choose to harm those 200 animals when you can not do that? And here's the thing, though, right? Veganism is a non-action. You're just choosing to not harm animals. What you are doing now is taking an action to harm animals, because otherwise they wouldn't be harmed. You're not saving anyone by going vegan. You just stop harming them.
I mean, I, this is a really weird philosophical tangent, and it's something that I've, you know, but basically is I don't think there's a moral difference between killing and letting die. I think that's sort of the same thing. So that
No, not really. You're still not. Again, you're gonna let animals die because the demand is not gonna translate in real numbers from your, you
no,
know,
all
personal
I was saying
consumption in like a
is
year or so.
well, all I was saying is that, you know, whether it's framed as me saving these animals, or me going out and personally killing these animals, I don't think there's a meaningful moral difference. And this is a really niche philosophical position that like I arrive at. Like it has stuff to do with like the abortion debate and stuff like that, but it's not really important to me. Like whether it's framed as me saving the animals or me
No.
going out and killing
Um,
them, it's obviously a morally wrong thing to do, right? So
yeah, I don't think you understand exactly what I'm saying. I'm trying to say that if you stop funding this now, in like a year or two, those 200 animals will
not
Sorry, you
be
cut
bred
out.
into existence and live a miserable life and die. Oh yeah, sorry, my internet is pretty bad. What I'm trying to say is that if you stop funding this now, in a year or two, when the supply and demand chain, adjusts to that change, 200 animals less will be bred into existence and die for your meals. So it's not that they will keep, for example, if I were to be a non-vegan right now, there would be like 200 animals more in the supply chain dying for me every year. That doesn't happen.
I understand your point. I mean, the thing is I know a lot of food goes to waste, so I wonder how literally true that is, but the principle still
That's why I
applies,
said
right?
it takes time for that to adjust. It doesn't happen overnight. It
Mhm.
doesn't happen over a month. It takes like a couple of years or so.
I
But
mean,
the population is increasing as well, though, right? So if, for example, I stop eating meat and then a new baby is born and they take my place in the supply chain, that means that those 200 animals that would be dying for the new person would now, not be bred into existence. They would take like my spot or something like that. It's not a very literal thing, but it still makes a difference in the chain, right?
yeah, no, I think I agree with you. I feel like, if I can be honest, I feel like we've reached sort of the logical endpoint of this discussion. And I'll definitely think about everything that we've talked about in this debate, right now. But
Right. I have a lot more points to make, though.
all right.
Are you gonna respond to what I said?
I mean, the thing is there's not a lot for me to say except for I pretty much agree with a lot of your a lot of what you're saying. Again, and this is something that I said a few times. It's not that I believe that it's morally negligible whether or not individual people choose to be vegan or not. It's that the tactic that we go about. My contention was just about the way that we should conduct vegan activism, and I think just something that you mentioned earlier, the importance in developing vegan technologies is something that I hadn't considered much up until now, and it's something that I think is probably really important, and that I want to investigate more and think about more on my own time. So at least for this point, my all I really have to say is that I agree with you. And if you have more things you want to say, we can go ahead and discuss it. But I feel like a lot of what's going to happen is mostly me just saying like, yeah, I agree with what you're saying. But there might be some more interesting things to talk about. So we can go ahead and continue.
Well, I won't take too long. I guess I'll just summarize everything I had to say somewhat, because I'm assuming it's time for you to go to bed as well. Like, don't you work at the weird shift and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a whole thing and what's going on today. But yeah, it's fine. If there's anything really interesting that needs to be brought up, we can elongate this. I plan for this in my schedule. But
Mhm.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the first note I wrote down was people want to embrace legal change without cultural change, right? So you're saying that we should go about cultural change, but if the people inside that culture don't change their mind about something, how will that happen, right? So if you tell people, hey, animals have moral value, so stop, killing them unnecessarily, but you say to them on the same breath, but it's okay to keep killing them unnecessarily until the government does something about it. Like, why do you think the government that benefits from this far more than you do would do something about it when you don't? Why do you expect others to change when you don't?
Well, my
They can
only
shift the
position.
blame to other factors just like you do, right?
Well, my belief is just that I think it'd be easier I think it's a lower threshold to get people to vote for these systemic changes than it is for them to go, like, voting isn't as hard as
Mhm.
changing your own lifestyle is. So I just the theory or the idea behind that position was just that it'd be easier to get people to vote for this than it would be to get them to change their own lifestyle.
Sure, but
Specifically,
oh my god, there's a weird bug here. Anyway, sorry. Ugh. Yeah, sorry. As Vigun said earlier, though, why would someone vote for something that they don't believe in? And why would you vote for something that takes away something you benefit from? That doesn't make much sense.
well, I mean, I guess this comes a lot from personal experience. I was raised in a family of people who eat meat, but we always talked about, we're like, yeah, no, the conditions that, like, what we have to do to get this meat is terrible and we should stop doing it. But we still ate it anyway, right? And I think...
Yeah, that's cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, and I feel like there is a level of cognitive dissonance there, obviously, but even with that cognitive dissonance, you could probably get people to vote for positions that... And I don't know how true this is, but this is just a feeling I have, that you can get people to vote for positions that they don't to undergo a change that they wouldn't undertake by themselves, basically. I don't know how true that is, but that was the mindset that I said that under.
Yeah, right. I would say that that's not very realistic, like from what we see so far. Like, why would you vote against something that benefits you? Why would someone who owns slaves vote against slavery? You clearly benefit from that one thing, so why vote against it? If you don't show others that you're okay without it, your vote wouldn't make any sense. Like, even if, like, some people were to vote against animal agriculture, and by the way, what you described was welfarism, right? Because the laws that go in place right now do not benefit the animals' rights, they benefit people's feelings. You feel better knowing that your cow was grass-fed, but it was still killed against their will for no good reason. That's still unjust for the animals. So it's not helping the animals, it's helping your consciousness at the end of the day. Yeah, that's another point, because vegans are abolitionists, right? Of course, welfarist laws can help us get there, though. That's the thing about cultural change. For example, a law was passed in the UK about the Animal Sentience Bill. I don't know if you've heard of it, but basically they recognize animals as sentient. So now practices in the industry that make animal lives miserable are slowly getting outlawed, right? That is not the end goal of veganism. But in order for us to get to a point where animals are treated as individual, it's necessary for us to understand that they're sentient. So this bill is huge, right?
Yeah. I mean, the word sentient is I don't know. I'd actually that's actually really interesting, because I kind of want to look into this and what because. I mean, I guess this is sort of branching off a little bit, but I do think there's a difference in the way humans think versus the way animals think. I don't know what exactly. Well, I use the word sentience, but I don't know to what degree that word is correct. But there's a level of awareness that humans have that animals don't have, and that I think means that we have more rights than animals. Not to say that animals don't have rights, because they do. But I don't know exactly what language you would use to describe that. But I mean, yes, obviously, at least as far as animals have, I guess what I would describe as agency. They have rights, and they have a level of moral worth. That means that we can't simply we cannot take away their rights unless I would say unless doing so is necessary to improve to uphold human rights. Rather, and you know, there's a difference between human rights and human comfort. And that's that you know, that what we're doing right now is undermining animal rights to uphold human comfort, which we can't do. I think,
yes,
if you accept that animals have rights, because that's what a right is. So
yeah.
I guess, like, all I was saying is that I have there's an interest in me. You know, I'm a psychology student, and so I'm really interested in human psychology, and it's also interesting to think about the degree to which animal psychology, and the degree to which their psychology is similar and different to ours. So just hearing about that interests me on a personal level, but that's sort of irrelevant to our discussion. But
Mhm.
uh,
Okay. Sorry.
sorry. So the original point, this is something I just remembered. The original point about me thinking that the reason I believe that people would vote for changes that they wouldn't adopt in their own personal life is because that was something that I would do. I would vote right now for animal rights without stopping eating meat because it's something I believe in, but it's not something I would put into practice. And I guess I sort of projected that onto I believe that there's a
Mhm.
number of voters who also believe that, and if we can get a number of voters that believe that would behave that way to do so, we could still advance veganism without actually changing the people's individual behavior. But again, putting that idea to the test, I'm not sure how numerous that population is, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah, that's also what I think. I don't think that most people would do that, right? Like, even if you say it, you might subconsciously think, oh, yeah, it's not going to happen anyway. I'm still going to have my steak every Saturday and stuff like that. Yeah, so I guess my last point that I wanted to bring up was, hold on. Oh, yeah, right. So if you don't find a sense of urgency in changing your habits, right? Why do you think that? That corporations and government and policy will? Because when it comes to human rights, right? When you brought up like driving and stuff like that, that's something that directly affects people, and people can communicate. They can fight back. They can, march down the street. Animals cannot do that. So we can abuse them and exploit them to all our liking, and they'll never fight back in a way that matters, right?
So let
So
me just
we can infinitely abuse animals all the way for anything we want, and they'll never fight back. So why would that be important, an important issue for governmental policy?
okay. So this is sort of a spiel. So let me just use an example. So I dislike. This is one of the things that I think started the contention. Is I dislike the phrase "personal responsibility" or "individual responsibility" when it's used in politics, pretty much flat out, anytime, because that is a tactic used by right wingers a lot of the time to dismiss a lot of the real systemic problems that
Mm-hmm.
for example black
Mm-hmm.
people face in America and stuff like that, and they say, well, it's because individual responsibility. It's not that black people are oppressed. It's that they are choosing to do X, Y, and Z. And it's like, no, if you understand sociology, you can see that there's actually a clear set of material conditions that are producing this behavior. And I think that generally when we're looking at political issues, it always makes sense to look at the material conditions that produce behaviors rather than the individual, choices that people are making, because basically people the way I think about it is people are not more or less moral today than they have ever been at any other point in time. People are only making different decisions because of the environment that they're raised in. People didn't start raping and murdering people less once society started forming because they got more moral. They stopped doing that because the environment they were in caused them to behave in a different way.
Yeah,
So
exactly. But how does that environment change? Does it change by someone raping when they like to, and saying, yeah, you shouldn't do that, by the way, that should be illegal, but I'm going to keep doing it because I'm not going to change anything, right?
uh, I I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure how to respond to that other than it's not.
Like on the same boat, right? As I said before, like why someone who benefits from slavery be against slavery and vote against slavery when they benefit from it? Cultural
Uh,
change is individual change. We are part of the environment we live in, and it's up to us to change how we act around it.
I, it I generally just don't like that rhetoric because it's used, and it's not. I'm not trying to say that this is definitely what's happening here, but in my experience, that rhetoric has pretty consistently been used to obfuscate the importance of the systems that people live under and
No.
the and
Listen.
again, I'm not trying to say that's what you're doing. It's just my
Yeah, I
I'm
understand you don't
apprehensive
like
about that.
it, but like literally, we're just saying we want animal slaughter to be outlawed, but we won't get there unless we, culturally change our view of animals. And one way to do that is to stop funding those industries. You can't say I value animal lives and pay for them to be killed for a sandwich. That is cognitive dissonance.
I mean, I agree with you there. It's just, I think the root of a lot of this contention, is just the fact that my only exposure to individual responsibility rhetoric in the past has been its use as a way of obfuscating larger social issues that exist. So I guess more than it's not even that I disagree with the points you're making. It's just I disagree with I just the framing of it more than anything. But it's not. I feel like it's not really even a particularly meaningful disagreement.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, yeah, I'll let you think about it then. And I don't think we have much left to say. I guess the other thing was how you brought up like PETA and how vegan activism is not, rubbing people the right way or anything like that. I'd say that if you can't convince yourself that you need to change, oh my God. Sorry, dogs. If you can't convince yourself that you need to change and that this is urgent, how can you tell others who try to do that how to do it? Like, they can convince you, okay, but you can't convince yourself either. So why are you gonna convince other people?
I mean, I would say that my own failure to act under my beliefs or in my own cognitive dissonance doesn't distract from the fact that the public perception of veganism isn't particularly good. I feel like, and I just think this is mostly a lot of misinformation. Probably, I'd have to look into this, but I would not be surprised if the meat industries in and of themselves end up paying for a lot of disinformation about what vegans believe in order to protect. I mean, knowing how oil companies act, I'm not. That doesn't surprise me. But so I do think there's a cultural issue just of how veganism is viewed, and I think it's important for us to change that cultural understanding of it. And that misunderstanding, and that bad PR exists regardless of my own personal beliefs is what I'd say. I think that is an issue that exists, and that's something that we need to rectify. And I don't think the fact that I have cognitive dissonance about this issue or am hypocritical in some ways invalidates that issue that exists. If
Yeah,
do you
sure,
understand what I'm saying?
yeah, but one wanted to say that the thing you said about people purposely misunderstanding the vegan movement. First of all, that happens a lot. I don't know if you know this site. I think it's called PETA Kills Animals or something, but it's literally funded by the meat lobby. If not the meat lobby, another animal agriculture business.
Yeah. Well, if I can be perfectly honest, in my just in my experience, PETA is very bad at PR, just generally. I've seen their propaganda; it's just not very well made. I don't mean that in a to dismiss. I don't even know the degree to which what PETA does, but all of my exposure to them has been their really poorly made propaganda pieces that make them look bad in a really, you know, like for example, a lot of their parody games are just like really bad satire, and and I don't know. This is obviously, you know, a bit of a thing, but the individual this is about veganism in general, but the organization PETA has a problem with not putting out the best PR. That is a critique of that individual organization, but you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure, but that doesn't have to be like at the expense of the animals. If they get you to think about animal ethics, it's working. If they get you to think about it and discuss it with other people, it's working.
I don't think that's true. If they put out a message that makes you dislike animal rights activists because there's this effect that exists where the more someone hears an argument, if the argument doesn't convince them the first time, it exponentially gets less and less convincing every time they hear it. So when people hear vegan arguments, we want to make sure they hear good vegan arguments the first time and not a straw man of them. And so,
agree.
Yeah. So, basically, what I'm just trying to make is like the idea that all PR is good PR just is not true for activists. We need to make sure that like when we put out messages, we want to make sure that they are convincing and they don't, you know. I'd have to go back and like look at can someone? I just got pinged. Yeah, people can be unconvinced by a good argument, but if you make a good argument poorly, you're making it very, very likely that people are not going to agree with you. So, we don't only need to make good arguments; we also need to make good arguments well. Basically, is what I'm saying. So that's the criticism I have. You know, PETA may be making good arguments in some of their, like whatevers, but if they're making a fundamentally good argument, which is like, oh, we are mistreating animals and that's bad, but if they make it in a way that is really off-putting and makes them like I can't remember. I'd have to go look at the examples, but they were very like demeaning and very accusatory in a way that it was like impugning people for their like participation in the system, and that makes pretty much everyone that reacts to it very defensive rather than what they should be doing, which is just bringing attention to the fact that the issue exists and that we should be doing something to help it. Like, I don't think an accusatory tone is good for convincing people over to veganism. I think we should just we should be focusing on empathy and empathizing with the animals and what we can do to help it. I think that's the convincing argument. A much more convincing argument, at least.
Everyone reacts differently to things. Like, I know a lot of people who went vegan because straight up they got bullied into it. I know people who went vegan because it was like a meme, and then they actually consider animal rights more and became vegan. I know people who went vegan because people were very nice to them and shared like vegan food with them. Everyone reacts differently based on the environment they were raised in, as you said before, right? So all types of activism, in my opinion, are very important. And I'm speaking for experience because, for example, like I'm in another vegan server where we do a lot of outreach, and like I started 1 in 5 people that we talk to is like, do you know that vegan teacher? Yeah, fuck vegans. So like, just even though her message can be like, condescending and people just, make fun of her and hate her, she brings attention to the issue and makes people want to talk about it more. Even if someone comes here and they start trolling, we can start a conversation with them and say, hey, why do you think this is okay? When compared to that, we'd have like veganism being an irrelevant topic. So compared to it being an irrelevant topic and it being like, a hot topic with bad rep, we can work with that, Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of nuance to this. I mean, we'd have to talk specifically about the specific like pieces of propaganda that were produced and the effect that it had on people. I feel like arguing about this in generalities isn't very productive. I think making your argument very eye-catchingly in a way that's very like what is it, like, not controversial, but like shocking almost. Like I remember there's this one tweet that I saw that was like, what is the moral difference between bestiality and eating meat? Like, is there a moral difference there? And that is very like shocking, right? But I think it's shocking in a way that's really good because it really highlights like it's a question that really demands an answer, and when you get down to it, like it's a question that's pretty hard to answer and to explain why bestiality would be wrong while meat eating would be okay, like morally. And so it's not that making your arguments in a shocking or not or uncivil way or whatever is bad. It's just and it just depends on exactly what you're saying and how you're saying it. And sometimes I feel like it can do more harm for the cause than good. I don't think all all PR is good PR. I don't think that's true, is my argument. But again, we'd have if we want to talk about this, at this point I'd want to have it over. Like I'd want to present the thing we're talking about and then actually talk about the effect that we think it specifically is going to have, because it's really, I mean, when we're talking about like propaganda, we are ultimately talking about art, and it's very subjective and hard to pin down. And so I don't think there are general rules for how you should go about making these things. I think it's very dependent on the context of the specific piece in question. So, I don't think it's really worth it to continue this discussion without being more specific.
I agree, and it's kind of like off the topic we're talking about. But yeah, do you have anything else to add? Any other questions?
I mean, I would like to have. I'd be really interested in like a sit down and talk, or maybe like a discussion, or something at a later date, because there are a lot of. I need to head out just to do other stuff, but there are a lot of questions I have about how veganism would be implemented, and that's what I'm most interested in, really personally, is what a future looks like, both from an animal rights perspective and an environmental perspective of how we should go about accomplishing these things, because there's a lot of really interesting questions to be asked, and I'm the type of person who cares about like learning more about urban planning. I think that's an interesting topic, so I'm just a nerd who likes learning about that stuff,
Okay. Yeah, we can totally do that sometime as well. It'll be fun.
Yeah. Anyway, I think this was a really interesting discussion. If we can. So I think we can go ahead and close this here, if you guys are okay with that.
Yeah, I think we discussed most things. I don't know if anyone else has anything to say. Probably not. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for being intellectually honest for the most part. And yeah, cheers, man. Thank you for your time.
Cheers. See you guys later.
See ya.
All right, I'll be heading out.
Okay, I'm gonna bring on Groovy just for shits and giggles.